Hello, everyone. This is your reference librarian, Jade here, live with Meredith May, author of the best-selling memoir, The Honey Bus.
Hello, thank you, Jade. I really thank you to the Willard Library too for putting this together. So I hope I'm on, and I'm really excited to be here. I guess if you can see and hear me, Jade, if people can hear me, maybe they could send a little wave or a comment, and then we know we're good, and then we can go. Okay. Everyone hear me? Sounds good? And I think Jade was going to do an introduction. But if not, I'll just go for it. Okay, I think I'm going to go for it because I can't hear Jade. Oh, okay, she introduced me. We're on. Good. Hi, everybody. So, gosh, never in my wildest dreams did I think that, my little story about how my grandpa and his honeybees rescued me from a rocky childhood would touch so many people. And it's just really humbling and healing all at once to have this happen and to talk about the themes that come up in my book with so many people who have had similar experiences, either with grandparents or with mental illness or, just with nature, being healed by nature. So really, this is amazing. The Honey Bus came out in April 2019, and it's been published in 18 countries. And it's still on a book tour. We're still rolling here. And the paperback came out in March. There was a book tour planned. I was actually going to physically be there in Michigan. But as you know, librarians and bookstores are adapting really fast. So here we are, we're doing this. And so from the bottom of my heart, I really want to thank Willard Library. I want to thank Jade. I want to thank Kathy Lucas. You all hustled to make this happen. As I understand, this is the first time using this program, this webcast program, StreamYard. So we're going to give it a whirl and just be gentle if we mess up here and there. We're all learning together how to have community virtually, right? So one cool thing is I've prepared a slideshow that I'm going to attempt to share my screen and show you about my book. And I haven't been able to do this yet on any platform. So this is what I usually bring with me when I travel. And it'll give you a little background to my story. And it'll explain how Grandpa and his bees taught me about family. And then this will take up a little bit of time. And then after that, I want to switch to your questions. So just fire away. You can fire away whenever you have them. And then Jade will help me see them and answer them for you. So I'm going to switch my screen now. If you could all give me some comments to let me know that you can see this. Okay. Now I'm going to come off of it for a second because I have to do that to see your comment. Okay. All right. Here we go. Hi, Kathy Forte. I can see you're here. And Holly, okay, everyone, you could see that slideshow that I just put up. It was just the book. All right. Way to go. Okay, guys, I'm going to go back to it. Here I go. Oh. I am very proud of myself here for figuring this out with Jade's help. Okay, here we go. All right, so I hope you're ready to see my embarrassing family photos. All right, so, okay, so I was an odd kid. That's not me in the ballerina costume. I am the questionable looking costume on the other side. This is me in a costume that my grandmother whipped up at the last minute. I was raised by my grandparents. So her idea of a last minute costume is to put my grandfather's shoe polish on my face, the dog collar around my neck, and then a pair of her nylons around my head. And that was a hound dog. She'd read some article about last minute Halloween costumes you can make from everyday household objects, and sent me to school. So that was one of the stories in my book. And in elementary school, I refused to go out for recess because I wanted to stay in the classroom and rewrite my children's books. I thought that they were too saccharine, so I would twist the plots and make the characters more evil and make them a little more twisted. There was this one in particular. It's about a woman who has a pet hedgehog, and she accidentally plants seeds on him and waters them one day. And then when a section of her flower garden wanders away, she calls the police. And, I wrote the book from the hedgehog's, and she thought someone was stealing her flowers, but I rewrote it from the hedgehog's point of view. And in my mind, he was camouflaging himself on purpose to get away from this crazy lady who lived in a mansion by the sea. So that was me. And needless to say, I was of concern to my teachers. This is my second grade report card. And at the bottom, I thought this was very funny. I underlined it in red. My teacher encouraged me to exchange phone numbers with classmates and get together with them. I used to eat lunch in the classroom, like I said, and she would try to get me to go outside for recess. But, I'm happy to report I eventually learned how to make friends, and 40 years later, I was able to turn my awkward story into a book. And I was driven to write this memoir because, like all of you, there's a soundtrack to my life that plays on loop in my head. And it's this steady beat of emotions and memories that, for some people is pleasant, but for me is more like an earworm that was going to devour me if I didn't write it down. So the story comes out because it can't not come out. And when I'm writing it, it's almost like a delirium. I'm not quite sure what I've done until readers read it and then give me feedback about what I've done. And so, thanks to that feedback loop, I now know that the Honey Bus is about that special bond between little girls and grandpas. It's about the ancient wisdom of honeybees. It's about losing a mother to mental illness. And it's a love letter to 70s California, when we were all drinking Tab and driving Gremlins and listening to the Bee Gees on 8-track. We all did it. My mother had a porta potty blue Gremlin, just like that. And the story starts when I'm 5. And like a lot of kids in the 70s, my parents divorced. Only in my case, it set my mother tumbling into a downward spiral from which she never returned. And my little brother, Matthew, was 3 when this happened. We were living in Rhode Island at the time, in Newport. That's our actual house. And I remember a big fight in the kitchen. Dishware was thrown. And not long after, I found myself on a plane with Mom and Matthew. And when the plane landed, we were in California. And the 3 of us moved into my grandparents' tiny red house. And I shared a bed with my mother, and my brother had a cot at the foot of the bed. And that was our living arrangement for the next decade, as my mother slipped into a marathon melancholy and retreated to bed. And she never mentioned my father again. My grandmother became absorbed by my mother's problems. And so my brother and I, we gravitated toward my grandfather, who was an eccentric mountain man who had more than 100 beehives tucked into the remote canyons of the Big Sur coast. He was also a plumber. That's why we had piles of stuff like this in the yard. And people often said he looked like Mark Twain. This is a Christmas present, and we rarely got new stuff. And when we did, it was very special. And this is Grandpa not wanting to use his wheelbarrow because he didn't want to scratch it up yet. So it became more like his recliner. He would watch nature programs like Jacques Cousteau and sitting in the wheelbarrow. And he would also go catch swarms of honeybees. Every spring, the phone would ring and people would say they had bees in their trees, in their walls, in their car, under the hood of their car. And he would go catch them. And this is probably familiar to many of you. This is Coast Highway 1 in Big Sur. And this is the road we'd take to get to his beehives. And this is Palo, Colorado Road. We'd turn off the highway onto this until it ran out of pavement and became this with super tight switchbacks. And we had to bring a chainsaw in the truck because often there were trees that had fallen across the road. And in winter times, it was really slippery and we drove through creeks and it was super precarious. And we were headed toward this place. And this is an overview Google map to kind of give you a picture of how remote it is. His hives were located in this canyon. It was called Garrapata Canyon. You can see Highway 1, the Coast Highway on the left. And so we would have to 4-wheel it to get down into his apiary. And the reason he picked such a remote spot was because it was really good for the bees. They were buffeted by the wind from the mountaintops. There was a Garrapata Creek right there, so the bees had a source of water. And then the whole area was covered with wild sage, which was very easy for the bees to forage because all they had to do was fly out of the beehive, fly up to the top of the mountain and feast. And as their bodies got heavier and heavier and heavier, they just kind of sank right back down to the beehive. So they really didn't have to work very hard. And if you are a honey aficionado, there are 3 kinds of honey that are super prized for their taste and because they never crystallize and their health benefits. And one is sage. The other 2 are Manuka and Tupelo. So this is Grandpa's bee yard, and this is where he would bring me and apprentice me. And this is our backyard in Carmel Valley. And I like this photo because what do you notice about his outfit? And I'm sure a lot of you are noticing he's not wearing very much protective gear, including he's working barehanded. So he believed, like a lot of old-time beekeepers, that bee venom prevents arthritis. which he never got. So maybe it's true. But also, a lot of beekeepers don't wear gloves. I do, but he doesn't, and a lot don't, because it forces you to be more gentle around the bees. And also you can sense their mood by feeling their vibration and feeling how they're moving. So it brings you closer. I would love to do that, but I don't like getting stung. So one of the stories Grandpa would tell me about bees, and one of the things we would do together, is look for the queen. And that was really meaningful for me because the queen is the heartbeat of the hive. She's the only bee in the hive that can lay eggs, yet she can't feed herself or keep warm at night. So she relies on her daughters, which you see circling all around her, to feed her, bring her water, and to surround her, to cuddle her at night to keep her warm. So even though Grandpa wasn't saying this overtly, he was showing me a mother-daughter bond in nature, and that made me feel better. I couldn't put that into words until I was an adult. And so that's one of the ways that he was teaching me about life without being overt about it. He would tell me stories about bees and how they solve problems. A lot of people ask, what's the red dot on the queen? That is a paint marker. Beekeepers use little markers to mark the queen because it makes it easier to find her when you're inspecting your hive, especially if you have hundreds of hives. So Grandpa and his bees modeled the generosity and the love that was missing from my life. And slowly over time, I learned how to trust again. And the title of the book comes from an actual bus. It was a World War II Army bus that was marooned in Grandpa's backyard. He bought it from a friend in Big Sur who got it at auction at the Fort Ord military base. And he ripped out the engine, tore out the seats, and he built his honey factory inside out of old spare junk. And to my grandmother's great chagrin, he parked it right here. I made a little Where's Waldo arrow for you. And there's a closer view. And that's where the honey bus sat for the next 60 years. And every summer we would extract honey and bottle it up inside. And it was kind of like my confessional. You know, it was the one place where I could talk about my problems with Grandpa away from the rest of the world. And that's what it looked like inside. I mean, you can see it's very DIY and not OSHA approved. Those are Wesson oil cans in the corner there that he'd fill with honey for customers. And that was the spinner that we'd put the wooden frames of honeycomb, we'd pull them out of the hive, put them in that spinner, and then the force of the centrifugal force would make the honey fly out of the honeycomb, collect on the inside of the spinner, and drip down. Before you put the frames in the spinner, though, you have to slice the wax. The bees seal each little hexagon with a thin layer of wax. So he had this knife here that he heated up with steam that came through a tube that was taped to the handle. And so you slice it like cheese first and then put it in the spinner. And you know, you're lucky he's wearing pants in these photos because it often got so hot when we were extracting in the summer, and we had to keep all the doors and windows shut so the bees wouldn't come in. And when we fired up the machinery, the whole bus rattled and it just got like a sauna in there. And he would sometimes just take his pants off and work in his BVDs and his Chuck Taylors. And then you can see there was like these pipes that ran the length of the ceiling. So after the spinner would spin, he had a pump that would pump it from that spinner up through the tubes. And then they would pour out over holding containers with cheesecloth stretched across the top. And the whole thing was powered by an engine he'd ripped out of a lawnmower. So Grandpa counseled me, but he didn't speak to me directly. He talked to me about, well, he used bee metaphors, and he would talk to me about how bees solve problems. And I remember we talked a lot about the scout bee. So I'm sure you've heard that bees dance. They dance to let each other know where the flowers are, but they also dance if there's something wrong with their home, if it's too crowded or too damp. And they dance to let the bees know the address of the better home that they've found. And I don't know, they have a meeting or something, but they pick a day and a time and they relocate to the better home with the queen. And that's when you see a swarm in the air like that. And what I realize now, what Grandpa was trying to say to me when we talk about the scout bee is that maybe the home I had wasn't the best place for me now. But there was another home out there waiting for me if I took the initiative to go out and find it. So he was giving a little girl a concept of a future, and ultimately he was giving me hope. So that is what I was trying to convey in my book. That's what I was trying to capture, is how there's just this real thin line that kids like me walk on, and we can fall off so easily, but it only takes one person to step in and make all the difference. And that person doesn't even have to be related to you. I call him Grandpa, but he's my step grandpa. He's the man who raised me, but we share no blood. And that thing that saves you doesn't even have to be human. It can be an insect. So that's my show. I'm going to escape out of this and come back to you. Here, I'm back. Okay. So, hi, everybody. So, Jade, I cannot hear you, but I can see comments. So, if we'd like to switch to questions, we can do that. I could also do a little reading. Let's see, how about, I'm on live comments here. So why don't I do this? If you want to post questions, I can see them in the comments and then I can answer them. In the meantime, I'll do a little reading from the book. How about that? I'll do like a 5-minute reading. I also have the other covers if you want to see. It's kind of interesting how the other countries interpreted the book. So why don't I do that? I'll show you a few covers. I'll do a little reading, and then as questions come in, I'll answer them. Okay, so here we go. Okay. I wish I could hear you, Jade, but I'm rolling with it. Okay, this is, let's see, China. Okay. I see your question, Kathy. And this one is Netherlands. And this is Uruguay, Italy. This one's really interesting to me. It's kind of very Versace, right? This one is a favorite. This is UK. Let's see. There we go. And what I really adore, I mean, it's just gorgeous. They hired a beautiful, wonderful artist named Sirpa in the UK to make that cover for me. And I love the Polaroids that they put in the marble paper on the inside. And they made like pencil handwriting captions. It's just really gorgeous. Germany has sort of a flower power look to it. And, South Korea. And this is a Monet painting. Okay. Kathy Forte, you were asking what's happening with my beekeeping now. I recently moved from the Bay Area, from San Francisco to back home to Carmel Valley. I moved in August. So in the city, I had 6 beehives and I took care of them in a community garden with a friend. It's a real pain in the patootie to move beehives. So I left them there, and my friend, I call him my beekeeping husband, Aaron, he's still taking care of them. And I started a new apiary here at my house. So I have 4 empty hives set in place, and I had to encircle them with a animal-proof fence because I moved to the country. I'm up in the mountains, 800 feet in rural Carmel Valley, and we have mountain lion, and we have bear and skunk and bobcat and all manner of stuff that would love to eat the honey and the bees. So I had to have learning how to do it differently here. I am trying to catch swarms. I put lemongrass in the hives and I'm trying to lure them. But I have a friend in Big Sur who was mentored by my grandfather in beekeeping, and he's bringing me some bees in a couple of weeks. I'm very excited about that. And he has hygienic queens, and I don't want to get too entomologically geeky right here now, but they're very good at combating mites. So I'm super excited to try one of those types of queens. And then also, but I do have 1 hive because last month, a childhood friend had this very big I Dream of Jeannie vase on her front porch, and a swarm moved in. And she called me and asked if I wanted them. And I offered to come pick them up. And she said, "Oh, no, I'll put them in my car and drive them to you." And she did. And a few got out, and she pulled over along the way and just wrangled them back in. I was so proud of her. So I have those bees. I have Anita's bees, and I just checked them yesterday, and they're building wax in there, so they're going to stay and not fly off. So I am super excited about that. So I am in the middle of restarting an apiary, and it probably will be a year before I have honey again, because I know, Kathy, you buy my honey by the gallon, so I will soon. Charlotte, is there a list of questions about the book that can be discussed by a book club? Charlotte Erickson. Yes, on my website, and that's thehoneybus.com, there is a book club guide, a PDF, and you can download, and it has all manner of stuff for your club and questions. Yes, yes. All right. So let's do a little reading. So I'll pick a section here for you. Hang on. Okay. All right. So this is a section about the first time I made honey with my grandpa in the honey bus. Okay. Nearly a foot of honey collected in the basin, so thick and shiny that we could see our faces reflected in it. The pump kicked in and gulped at it, sending languid bubbles to the surface as it pushed the honey up through the pipes. The plumbing reverberated as the pump forced the honey up a main artery leading from the spinner's basin, all the way to the ceiling where the tube branched off at a wide joint into two smaller joints. From here, the honey was channeled past the passenger windows and toward two 50-gallon storage tanks behind the driver's seat. The honey pipelines came to an end just above the open-mouthed tanks and were suspended in place by metal wire Grandpa had secured to the ceiling handrails with heavy-duty plumber's tape. I kept vigil over those spouts, bewitched. "Here it comes," Grandpa said. The first rivulets of honey bubbled out of the pipes and cascaded into the holding tanks. It was pretty, like a girl's blonde hair undulating in the wind. I remembered Grandpa told me once that one bee makes less than a thimbleful of honey in its whole life. So much was spilling out now that it must have taken a million bees to make it all. We worked all day until the sun started to sink behind the Santa Lucia Range, turning the mountains from dark green to gray until we had nearly 100 gallons of honey. I lost myself in the movements of lifting frames and slicing wax and imagined we were worker bees inside our own hive. The whir of the extractor sounded like the hum of a colony, drowning out our voices, so we had to communicate mostly by hand gestures. We nudged each other in this direction or that, shaking one another by the shoulder to convey something important. If we were at either ends of the bus, we had to wave and dance like a bee to get the other's attention. Grandpa cut the motor with the last rays of sun, and even after the bus shuddered to stillness, my ears continued to ring. My arms ached and my throat was dry. We had slight wax sheens on our hair and skin, and we smelled of butter and sage. I had never worked so hard that my body felt asleep before bedtime. Grandpa lifted the gate at the bottom of the holding tank, held an old mayonnaise jar under the spout, and filled it with honey. He reached for a roll of square white labels with red lettering and slapped one on the jar. Wildflower honey, U.S. choice, from the Big Sur apiaries, E.F. piece. "Here you go," he said, handing me the jar. "You made that." The honey glowed in my hands like a living, breathing thing. It was warm, and I loved it because it made sense when nothing else did. It was a pure example of what Grandpa had been trying to explain inside the bus, that beautiful things don't come to those who simply wish for them. You have to work hard and take risks to be rewarded. But he wasn't exactly correct when he said I alone made the honey. Both of us harvested it, but the bees made it. They'd collected nectar from millions of flowers to make this one small pound of honey in my hands. All of us, humans and insects, in our separate ways, had traveled far, navigated dangers, and labored to exhaustion for a shared obsession. We made this honey because we believed we could. Hi, Jade. I just saw you.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now,
Okay, good.
but I see just me, but that's cool as long as I can hear you.
Okay. Let's see, are there any more questions for you? Okay. Why don't...
I can talk about some of the really common questions I get. A lot of people want to know about my brother.
Okay.
Should I tell people about And I think it's because I didn't put him in the epilogue, which is my bad. I'm realizing. So my younger brother, Matthew, obviously he went through this with me. It was a really interesting process to interview my brother for the book, because it's interesting. You remember things, you remember the same event, but you internalize them in very different ways. Also, my brother was 3 when the book starts for me, when we moved to California. So a lot of the things I remember, he doesn't. But I shared the book with him before I turned it into my editor. I wanted to make sure that he was okay with how I portrayed him and how I remembered things, even though he didn't remember a lot of the same things I did. And he was great. I mean, he had some corrections for me about airplanes and cars that I messed up. So that was good. But he is doing great. He lives in San Mateo. He works for Apple. So that's kind of like working for the CIA. I don't know exactly what he does, but he enjoys it. He can get on my screen and give me IT help at a moment's notice, which is so valuable. He's also a wonderful photographer. He had his own business for a while, shooting destination weddings. He was flying all over the world, India, China, photographing these lavish weddings. He's married. He also does not have children. And we talk every week, if not every day. He's my rock, you know. And he's also a very private person. So, you know, he was, you know, lucky him. I'm his sister. So, you know, he's very, very gracious about me putting our family business on Main Street. He just is a little squeamy now because sometimes friends or coworkers will invite him to lunch and then tell him that they've read the book and want to ask him, you know, a lot of intimate family questions. And, you know, he's a little unsure about that. But other than that, he's loving every aspect of this. He's really supportive. Yeah.
You have a few questions from Kathy, Nancy, Christine, and Charlotte.
I see that someone wanted to know what pages I was reading from. Ooh, heck, you know what? I'm reading from the Galley, which is going to have a different page number. The Galley is the pre-book that comes out before the book that gets sent around to bookstores and such. So I can tell you the chapter. How about that? It was chapter 8, First Harvest. Towards the end, it's the final pages of chapter 8. That's as close as I can get there. What's the relationship between me, I'm reading another question, my father and my brother now? Let's see, my father would fly us out for summer visits, starting for me when I was 7 until about 17, you know, when I went away to college and then got busy with my own life. So my brother and I flew out for summer visits, and then we lost contact a little bit. We stayed in touch with letters and a phone call now and then. But I think, you know, it's hard to maintain an intimate relationship with someone you didn't start foundationally with. So when I got older and had a little more agency and could fly myself to visit my father, I was on one of those trips that he asked me what this Facebook thing was. And I helped him make an account. And then he was pinging me all the time through Messenger. And we actually got closer through Facebook. It's kind of interesting. And then when I got my MFA in grad school, I chose a school that was real close to his hometown. Coincidentally, I went to Goucher College in Maryland. And so then I saw him a lot more then as well. And so we have reconnected. My brother and my father have not. My brother has hurts that are personal to him and kind of get in the way of him trusting our father. So that's something that they may or may not work out. I don't know. But that's what's going on in the maze. Okay, here's some bee questions. Are bees still endangered? Yes, they are, as long as we keep putting pesticide on our agricultural crops and then trucking bees on trucks and putting their hives in those crops and forcing them to forage on that contaminated nectar and pollen. Yes, we're messing with nature and we're messing with bees. I think what you are referring to is the term colony collapse. In 2006, a lot of beekeepers were reporting their bees were just simply disappearing, like up and leaving eggs behind and food behind, not swarming, just vanishing. And that has simmered down a bit. However, bees are still not rebounding at the rate they should. When I was beekeeping with Grandpa, it was very typical for beekeepers to lose about 10% of their bees over winter time. And now that figure is closer to mid 40% and somewhere up to 50%. And it's sort of a perfect storm. It's not any one reason. It's not a mysterious disease like colony collapse. It's pesticides, like I mentioned. It's losing their forage as we build on top of meadows, and climate change is making things hotter. Flowers, when it's too hot, don't produce nectar. And then also this horrible mite, it's a Varroa Mite, that is really detrimental and devastating bees. So there's a lot of scientists right now, very smart people, that are studying how to combat this Varroa Mite. It's a parasite. It attaches itself to the bee's body and sucks their fluid. And then it passes on to them all sorts of viruses that can deform their wings or mess up their navigation. So yeah, they're still in trouble. So the best thing you can do, and it sounds a little too easy to be true, but is to plant wildflowers, native wildflowers, wherever you are. You can get them online, these little seed balls. It's like natives packed in little round balls of mud, and just push them into the ground. Be guerrilla wildflower planters, put them everywhere. And that is going to give bees some flyover food that's not contaminated. Is it difficult to keep bees? Should we do that one? Does it take a lot of time? I'm glad you asked, because beekeeping is super trendy right now, especially that we're all homesteading and looking for stuff to do in our yards. And Costco sells, I think, beginner beekeeper kits, and all of that is good. On the one hand, it's encouraging people to become beekeepers and to start providing sanctuaries for bees. But I always say it's like getting a dog. You can't just get bees and then expect them to take care of themselves. And it requires monitoring. You have to look into your hive pretty regularly, especially during spring and summer. Like I look in mine every 2 weeks, more during the height of summer, because you have to keep ahead of your bees. You have to know if there's something wrong with the queen. You have to replace her or your whole hive will crash. If they have mites, you got to take care of them. And if they put too much honey in the hive, you have to give them more room, because if they're crowded, they'll swarm. And if you live in an area where they could swarm into a neighbor's yard, that might cause an issue. So you have to be there for your bees. You cannot take off and go to Europe for the summer, or unless you have a beekeeper friend who can watch your bees. So it's good to know. So in that case, if that sounds like too much for you, another alternative is to open up your space to a beekeeper who's looking for places to put hives. And the typical arrangement is you allow them to use your yard, and in exchange, they give you a little bit of the honey crop every year. So that might be an alternative, and you could mentor with that beekeeper and learn, and then decide if it's for you. What else? What are my top 3 uses for honey? Well, besides, I like it raw on, I like a cracker with blue cheese and honey on top of it, and then I squish a walnut. That's like my snack. Also, honey is a really good wound dressing. You can put it on a cut. It has a natural property like hydrogen peroxide in it. And especially Manuka honey, which comes from New Zealand, from the Manuka tree, has the most of that hydrogen peroxide property to it. And that's why some hospitals use wound dressings with honey in them, but only Manuka, because it's the only one that's good enough for that. So I'll put it on a cut. It also is a good facial. You can put it on your face, and it cleans your pores. So you can do that too. Just like make sure you're in the bathtub or something, because you'll get it all over the place. Yeah, I also like it in kombucha too. Who designs the different covers for the different countries? The different publishers. So basically, I have a publisher in the United States. I published through Park Row, and Park Row is owned by Harlequin, and Harlequin is owned by HarperCollins. So it's a wonderful situation where I have like boutique publishing house within a very large publishing house. So you get the best of both worlds. Like you call and people pick up the phone, yet when it's time to publish the book, you get a wonderful publicity team behind you. So that's in the US. And then the book gets sold to other countries as well. So other countries will find out about the book, and if they want to buy it, they make an offer. So I have a different publisher, like in France and Italy and in Poland. They're all different. And so they all decide what they want the cover to look like, just like Park Row and Harlequin and HarperCollins decided what the cover would look like for the US version. So it's always a lovely surprise to see how other cultures interpret my story. And in some cases, they change the titles too, because Honey Bus, when it doesn't translate, or when it does translate, it's kind of crude. So like some of the books are called like Beekeeper's Daughter and different variations on a Honey Bus. Yeah, good question. Oh, murder hornets. Okay, I knew that was coming. Yeah, there's been some scary stories in the news that there are these extremely large, like large as your pinky, hornets that somehow arrived here from Asia that like to devour honeybees by decapitating them. And they showed up in Washington State area. I have not seen or heard of anything like that where I am in Northern California, but we're not that far from Washington State. But to be honest with you, I am not worried because 2 reasons. Bees are super smart, and I know they like a dying or a flagging, sagging hive cannot defend against invaders. Like regular old yellow jackets will go into a hive and kill all the honeybees. They'll eat the honeybees, but they also want the honey. So it's not just these murder hornets that do this, but if there are enough numbers, if the hive is strong, they can defend. And what they do is they ball up around the invader. So let's just say a murder hornet. They ball up around it and literally overheat it with their body heat. So collectively they can defend themselves. So I think that they will figure, they're smart enough to handle this, number one. And then number two, I see a lot of news stories about bees that are super dramatic, like this murder hornets, zombie bees, and African killer bees. I mean, there's just like a lot of excitement about making them really scary and making these stories blown out of proportion. So I think there's a little bit of that going on too. I see what we're doing now, Jade. Okay. What's one of my favorite books besides mine? I would never say my book is my favorite book. But I recently discovered Olive Kitteridge and Olive Again. I loved those books. They're fantastic. I really liked Tara Westover's Educated. That book floored me. I like anything written by Flannery O'Connor. She's amazing. And then I just read Deborah Eisenberg, who's a short story writer who's been around for a while, and I've sort of missed this, but she has a collection that came out around the same time the Honey Bus came out, and it's called, I want to say, My Duck is Your Duck, or Your Duck is My Duck. It's a collection of 6 stories, but she's phenomenal. I think I'm drawn to people who write about broken people, and that's really what all of these authors I'm throwing out there right now do. And I love Deborah Eisenberg so much that she has a huge volume of all her stories. I just got that. I'm going to start with that one. And then right now I'm reading a book that just came out, Good Boy. And it's about the author's life with 7 different dogs. Because I see the next question, I'm sagging here, is, am I writing a new book? Yeah. And it's about, it's tentatively called Loving Edie. And it's about my bumpy road to motherhood by taking care of my very anxious golden retriever puppy, Edith, who has panic attacks. And I've always had dogs, well, golden retrievers. She's my 3rd. And I've always had dogs to make myself feel better. That loyalty of a dog sort of feeds a little empty place for me. But this is the first time I had to be there for a dog, and it's been a hard road. I mean, she's on Prozac. She's really a sensitive creature, and anyway, she sometimes video bombs, so maybe I can get her to come out and say hi to everybody. Okay. Hey, Jen, do you want to send Edie out? All right, we'll see if she'll make an appearance. But I've written 5 chapters, and I'm working with the same editor and the same publisher, and I'm so excited about that. It's a whole same team, and I'm really looking forward to this one. I mean, here she is. Come here, buddy. Edie, come. Come here. Come here. Come say hi. Come say hi. Hi. Hi, buddy. There she is. She's a year and a half. And her problem, we got her when we were in the city, and she's like her flight or fight response is off the charts flight. And so things that scare her are traffic, loud noises, gunshots, fireworks, fire hydrants, umbrellas, Amazon boxes left on the doorstep, barking dogs, you know. So she'll run, she'll take off when she gets really scared. So we have this collar. I can't see it. It's got a GPS on it in case she ever takes off. But since we've moved to the country, she's doing much, 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 much better. Yeah. I think the city overwhelms her. It's just too much going on. Yeah, but you're okay, huh? You're good? Are you good? Okay. Oh, some people are asking about my first book. So I'll just mention that real quick. We're coming up on an hour, but I'll mention the first book I wrote came out in 2017, and I ghost wrote it. It's a memoir of two men from the Middle East who fought in the Iran-Iraq War in 1980. The book is called I Who Did Not Die, and I told both of their stories, and basically it follows a 12-year-old Iranian child soldier who was forced to go into underground bunkers after a big battle and shoot anyone still alive. And he only found one man, an Iraqi man, who was injured, and he couldn't bring himself to shoot him. So instead, what he did is he made a wall of corpses and dragged the injured Iraqi behind it and hid him and nursed him back to health for 3 days. And then they went their separate ways, never got each other's name. They were both captured. They were both prisoners of war for many, many years. And then 20 years later, they sit down next to each other by chance in the lobby of a help center for torture survivors in Vancouver, Canada. And they just start talking, and then they realize that they both were in the same war, they both were in the same battle, and then the Iraqi man says, yeah, and this little kid saved my life. And he said, oh my God, that's you. So it's this incredible story of mercy and brotherhood. And so they lived 20 minutes away from, or 20 minutes apart in Vancouver, didn't even know it. And so now they're like family and brothers. And so I wrote that in 2017, and I'm still in contact with both men. They're incredible people and role models for me. And the Iranian speaks more English than the Iraqi man. I worked through interpreters to talk to both of them. I flew to Vancouver for 4 weeks, and interviewed each of them over 2 weeks, getting their story. And it was amazing, actually. So that book is out there too. I think it's hard to find a print copy. I think it's just in digital now and audio. Yeah.
Okay. Meredith, I'm going to hop on again.
Okay.
I think, oh, there I am. Hi. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, there, evening here.
Yeah.
And if anyone hasn't read The Honey Bus, we have it available through Libby and Hoopla. Again, thank you so much.
This was a joy. This was great. And the tech worked. I couldn't hear you for a little while, but it didn't matter. I could
hope
the whole time. But I really thank you. I hope that, especially during this time, books can help us have a better sense of community and bring us back together a little more. And I just really applaud you and Willard Library and Kathy for pivoting so fast and figuring this out and kind of opening up a lot of doors for writers to reach their readers. So thank you, everybody.